Are you ready to revolutionize your relationship with money? Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where I, Dr. Disha Spath, will be your companion on this exciting adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms. Pearson Ravitz' story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB-GYN at the height of her career. But then, a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery. Her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com to schedule your consultation with a Pearson Ravitz advisor. So today we are so lucky to have Dr. Nirav Shah, Dr. Leif Dahleen, and Dr. Jorge Sanchez here from the Physician on Fire. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. Leif, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself and tell my audience about who you are.
Sure. Just a quick overview. My name is Leif Dahleen. I am a retired physician, semi-retired person. I was an anesthesiologist for about 13 years post-residency, having retired now 4 years ago, and traveling with my family quite extensively during that time. And 7 to 8 years ago, I started Physician on Fire, which is a website and a brand that helps physicians with their finances, learn about investing, taxes, and financial independence, and all the good things that go along with that. Right now, I live in northern Michigan, and I've got 3 teenagers here. 2 of them are mine. One is a foreign exchange student from Mexico. Just carting them around to their many activities keeps me plenty busy.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine how you even keep up a job, right? With all this going on with the kids. I'm sure there's plenty to fill up your time. I really enjoy following your travels and your adventures, and your site has been so informative and formative for my own financial journeys. I'm so happy to have you on.
Fantastic. Thank you, Disha.
Nirav, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us about your journey?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And Jorge and my journeys are pretty linked in many ways. So I'll talk about how we met and how we got here briefly. Jorge and I met about a decade ago when I was a resident at University of Miami in neurology. And we met on a landscape photography trip out in the Pacific Northwest, became fast friends thereafter. My part of the story is I then went and became a fellow in San Francisco and then moved up to Seattle, where my wife's family is from, and became stroke director of a system here in about 2018 called Swedish, which is part of Providence. And then ultimately left shortly thereafter to start a tech company around monitoring patients with Jorge for wearables. So the buzzword now is remote patient monitoring. Before COVID, no one had heard of it. During COVID, it became very popular. And so we sold that company to Carpet Health, and we met Leif late last year and then got involved with Physician on Fire, which we'll tell you more about shortly.
Amazing. I have seen your photography. I totally stalked you earlier, and oh my God, it's so good. You're an artist and a tech entrepreneur, and we're very, very glad to have you on here. Jorge, welcome.
Glad to be here. So my story is a little bit long because I'm the oldest one, I guess. Well, I did academic medicine in New Jersey, went to the hospitalist group, was my first company in South Florida, and grew it, sold it, moved to Arizona, where I started becoming an independent contractor. I was burnt out from growing this company, and met Nirav on a photography tour. We became friends with, I think, Nirav. We did 30 days of, over a year and a half, just out there camping, eating bad food, taking amazing pictures. And we bet the camera on this idea of this remote patient monitoring that I didn't believe in. And lo and behold, I lost because the data was so impressive. This idea of a side hustle put me into the world of entrepreneurship. And lo and behold, I'm now here trying to change everybody else's lives and give everybody a chance to look at what entrepreneurship can do for you.
What a leap. So you were not really into remote patient monitoring, but Nirav convinced you, and then you went in and started a company together?
The data convinced me. It was so compelling that we had to put this out in the world, and took a chance, and COVID came and it just changed everything.
Yes. I remember telling my superiors in my clinic, trying to convince them that remote patient monitoring and telehealth was the next thing before COVID happened. And nobody was like, well, whatever, like that's not going to happen. Medicine moves so slow. Those changes are just not going to happen for another 20 years. And lo and behold, COVID happened. And all of a sudden, your product that you were offering became so relevant. So you were able to build this company. And how many years did you run it? And when did you sell it off?
There, what was it, 2017, over 2-3 years?
Yeah, I mean, the idea from idea to company formation was a couple of years, right? And so in the early phases, this bet, it wasn't a true bet. It was a gentleman's kind of agreement. Jorge was the medical director of a nursing home. And so I said, let's just try remote monitoring. You have access to these patients. We don't need to do any fancy technology. Let's just convince ourselves that it's useful. And so that's the data he's alluding to. We ended up presenting that data at American Heart. And then that's when we kind of got conviction that this could work in a variety of settings, especially in complex care, elder patients. We raised funding in 2019 after Medicare approved the reimbursement for RPM. And then 30 months later, we sold the carbon. Yeah, it was fast and pretty stressful, as you can imagine.
Okay, so now you have decided to shift gears and go into the financial education space with Dr. Dahleen. So, Leif, your site generally focuses on FATFIRE, and you have this group called FATFIRE, which is very active. Can you explain to me exactly what FATFIRE means and why it's especially for physicians?
FATFIRE is a term that I've embraced because when I first discovered the whole financial independence, retire early movement, pretty much all the big sites out there that were promoting it and talking about it were leaning, pun intended, towards lean fire, which is a low budget, like rice and beans, talking brown bananas and what to do with them, things like that, dryer sheets, how they can be reused. And I knew that didn't really appeal to me. It probably wouldn't appeal to a physician audience. And I know a lot of physicians who can get to a point, and I think the 3 or 4 of us are probably there or well on our way, where we can afford to spend 6 figures, maybe multiple 6 figures per year, and still reach a spot of financial independence given our physician incomes or entrepreneurship incomes and the combination thereof. It's kind of like the idea that you can retire early without compromises, without sacrifices. And when I was thinking about the idea of even starting a website and it came up with Physician on Fire, I considered frugal physician as one of the terms. But then I realized, well, that described me pretty well as a resident physician, maybe even as an early attending. In some ways I was frugal, in some ways I was not. But as I got further along in my career, had $1 million net worth, I realized that frugal is really not where I'm at anymore. So FATFIRE is really just the opposite of lean fire. That's why they call it fat. It's not living lean, it's living large, but still reaching a point where you can afford to live that lifestyle without any earned income. And I'm sure you've talked about the math, and I know I have many times, but having something in the range of 25 to 30 times your annual expenses saved up in investments is what you need to, I would say, qualify to be financially independent.
So 25 times is the financial independence, the regular financial independence. So FATFIRE, is that the 35 times then?
Well, I guess it depends. You can define it as a multiple of your spending or just what your baseline spending is. I'd like to think, especially now that inflation has made everything more expensive, most people, or at least families who are living a FATFIRE lifestyle, are probably spending 6 figures a year. And then having a cushion where you have maybe more than 25 times that annual expenditure number, just makes it all that much more bulletproof as far as your odds of having that money last and most likely grow while you're not necessarily adding to the pile, because your investments will earn money for you.
Right. As physicians, we're in this very privileged position of being able to spend 6 figures and still save a good bit of our money and invest it. And so, yes, we don't need to be in that traditional Depression era mentality of saving every single thing and rewashing our Ziploc bags. Yes, at the Frugal Physician, we're about just being frugal enough to maintain that savings rate and still enjoying life and utilizing our high spending ability to do credit card points and really maximize what we're getting out of life and the value that we're getting out of life. Now, Leif, I know that you have been an early supporter of the Frugal Physician. And like you said, we're kind of similar mentalities in that you actually thought about calling yourself the Frugal Physician. I've watched your journey. You have helped so many different people. Nirav and Jorge, I would love to hear about what drove you and motivated you to purchase into a brand that Leif is the founder of and to get into the finance space. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I think Jorge and I came at this from different angles. We both were at different parts of our career. In my case, my father's a pediatrician. He'd come to this country, probably like many of our parents, and went to rural America and was supporting his family back home. And so despite having a good income by any standard in rural farmland America, we never were, successful by other people's standards, right? When you think about that income, because most people don't know that money was going back home. He was bringing family over, et cetera. I think just thinking through the stress that I kind of grew up with and understood, it was pretty acute in my household to the extent that I graduated college early, got to medical school early. Throughout my whole journey, it was a really important topic around how to have some financial stability. And I was never want for food or security or anything. And they're very, very supportive in the ways that many Indian parents are. The key for me was most people can't go start a journey like the one that we took. And probably most people shouldn't, but if they want to, it's too hard. And so as we were trying to form the company and involve other physician friends or colleagues, we kept running into these barriers. And then after selling the company and, taking calls from so many different physicians who will email us or LinkedIn message us or just ask how to even start, the fundamental premise is it's this big opportunity cost. So I think that was a big motivator for me, this family context. And then seeing what Leif had built was really special, right? There's a real community. People are highly engaged. Even now, being on the other side of the fence, people will just email us to say thanks to Leif specifically for what he's written. It's definitely changing lives in a really unique way. On one hand, we think about taking care of patients, right, for most of our training and careers in medicine. And then I think in this case, thinking about what burnout means as this term becomes more and more popular. It wasn't a term really when I was a resident. I think it became popularized over the past 10 years. That's why it's so important. A few of my co-residents no longer practice medicine. I think due to the kind of the pushback against corporate medicine, being forced to see so many patients per day to hit a certain RVU target, but then how are you supposed to do that as a neurologist seeing a Parkinson's patient who's bradyphrenic or an Alzheimer's patient? Just seems a bit silly, right? Like how are you supposed to even do the right thing?
Right.
And take care of the patient, even if in the case of neurology, more so than other fields, there might not be that many treatments. And so I think when you kind of take the confluence of all those, we felt like there's a really important place to be. There's a moment in time right now. And if we can help our colleagues think through this, both at the fundamental level, which Leif has done a really good job of, 401k, backdoor Roth, and similar, maybe we can inspire them to plan and take different opportunity costs, not risks. So that's what everyone tells us is this big risk. For us, it was always an opportunity cost. We're just trading a little bit of time for potentially reduced income, definitely reduced income, to go chase a dream of ours.
The drive that you get from seeing your parents struggle. And I can see that you've got that fire in you for a terrible pun, to make something and build something. That's really inspiring. Jorge, tell us about your motivations and how you got into the finance space and why you thought this was a worthwhile investment of your time.
Sure. I mean, I think same thing. We're all driven by our parents in some way or another. I grew up in New Jersey, in Paterson, New Jersey. My mom and dad worked in factories. So I got to see how hard they worked and got into medical school, did academic medicine, and then growing this hospitalist practice in Florida. And then we moved to Arizona. And in Arizona, I started just meeting doctors in lounges, like hospitals. You sit in the lounge, you're eating bad hospital food, and you're sitting there and you're talking about your dreams. And along came this idea of our startup. I just saw that they were cheering me on. Like they were really happy for me that I was taking this chance. It dawned on me that there is this idea of golden handcuffs in healthcare, that corporate medicine has definitely commoditized the doctors our time. I was being told like, hey, it doesn't matter if you finish all your patients, you have to stay till 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, no matter what. You just sit there because this is what we had. So when I started talking to them about this idea and getting advice, they wanted to get in, but because of the golden handcuffs they had, they couldn't help in a meaningful way. They just would give us referrals, but it was like Nirav was saying, there was this barrier to entry that was very, very challenging. And then we entered into this side hustle. By the way, half of my friends who are doctors all do side hustles. And this was a side hustle that became entrepreneurship. And then I entered this world of entrepreneurship. It's a journey of failures and successes where you just like, it's execution. You answer to VCs, to boards. It's a very different flavor of accountability. In the end, I realized entrepreneurship, it shortcuts the long road that many people can take to fire, but it's exciting. It's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When I came along, we stalked the website, I think for a year, and we were talking about it because we were thinking about other ideas once we solved carbon. And I wanted to impact my colleagues and give them a system of reaching FIRE or FI that was validated, but it was flexible enough that you could write your own story to FI.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the main reason. So that was one of the reasons why. And I'm impressed with, now that I'm the other side, how hard this is. And Leif, I take my hat off to him. He's just an amazing writer, an amazing way of making things that are very complex, simple, which is not easy to do.
Yes. Yeah. And putting content out there every single week. It's a lot of work, way more than you imagine. I want to go back to this concept of both of you noticing that physicians felt stuck and in golden handcuffs. I'm a hospitalist too, Jorge. So I've had many of these conversations in the doctor's lounge where people just feel stuck and don't know how to get their finances under control. And the service that you're providing, that you can actually get a financial baseline or stability so that you can build and become an entrepreneur and pursue your dreams. It's a huge step, and we need a lot of help getting there as physicians because we're not really wired to be entrepreneurs. I wonder, Nirav, can you tell us about a little bit of your entrepreneur journey and what mindset shifts you needed to make in order to go from being a physician to being an entrepreneur?
Related to what Jorge was saying, I think the big opportunity for us in this space, whether it's frugal physician, white coat investor, semi-retired and passive income, and us and all the usual suspects, if you will, is I think we have a way to kind of change what Jorge and I have called doc-on-doc crime, where for years, somehow we have found ways to hold each other back around a variety of topics. And perhaps in some cases that was because it's ego that we couldn't question or challenge during training. We kind of assumed the worst of each other. Once I got laryngitis as an example, and I remember calling the chief resident, we all got laryngitis because we're all sharing the same call room.
Right.
Like it was serial. And the third person, you'd think, okay, well, we should just probably stop this for a minute. They said, are you really sick? I said, well, of course I'm really sick. The other two have laryngitis. Like we're walking around without throats. Like I could technically take call, I guess, but like you can barely hear me. She's like, you sound really bad. I don't know. Maybe you should come in. And so that's the kind of thing where it feels like if we kind of stood by each other,
right,
and found ways to do that. Now that's a system problem. That's not the person's problem. I don't blame that person at all because we don't have other people that are backup. I think we can really do meaningful things together. And this is a little bit more of a macro point. A reason why, in my opinion, neurologists as a community, physicians as a broader community are kind of siloed in some ways and aren't doing right by themselves and their patients and the community and as business people for a whole set of reasons where there's this weird competitive dynamic that we get through medical school and training that we don't get to give up and realize that we're actually peers and we're here to help each other. And it's a really, really small world that we're in and a long life. To me, that's kind of the fundamental premise that if we could measure doc-on-doc crime and reduce that, that'd be probably like the best outcome for all of this.
Physicians helping other physicians. What a novel concept.
And that's what Jorge and I experienced because some people we could tell were a little bit envious, right? And would challenge us and basically tell us our ideas were terrible on this path to entrepreneurship. I mean, Jorge and I have this great example where we're talking to this cardiologist in Miami that we got introduced to. He's smoking a Cuban cigar right in front of us. You can't even make this up. And as we're explaining this to him, the whole concept was hypertension, remote monitoring, reducing cardiovascular risk factors through cardiac monitoring. Clearly, this guy's not going to get it. We should have left the room at that point, but we are so persistent. And that's the kind of thing that, inspired us to kind of really take a lot of rejection. And I think physicians are good at that, right? We're probably the hardest working group of people that I'm aware of. Maybe lawyers read a lot, but we definitely are the hardest working in many, many ways. Maybe bankers. And so taking that and transitioning it into a way to work with people and have people work with you was the big shift. And figure out, between Jorge and I, or even with Leif, when you go from being the leader to the individual contributor is a pretty constant shift that we're used to making. If you show up to a code and Leif's there, I'm not going to run the code. Leif's going to run that code, for example. So those are the things that I think we are good at, but that's what it took, I think, to build a company. Jorge is my senior. I asked him if you want to be CEO. He didn't want to be CEO because he'd seen what it was like. And so he let me be the CEO of last company, deal with it. But then he was kind of the right-hand counterpart in many ways.
Interesting. So yeah, putting yourself out there, taking risks, and being flexible, I hear are very important traits to be entrepreneurs.
I think it was just really, really focusing on team. I mean, that's the hardest part of any human endeavor. Software can't do that yet.
Yes.
That is, I think, what's really tricky about changing something across a set of, constraints, whether it's in traditional healthcare, like you pointed out, or in what Leif has done, right? Like this is an artistic business inherently. It's more art than business in many cases. And I think trying to find that balance is very, very tricky, even for us.
So what is your collective vision for Physician on Fire going forward? And I'll let anyone take this.
Yeah, kind of talk about where it has been. And I guess I mentioned it briefly in my introduction, but it's primarily a blog. We do have a couple of large Facebook groups. And it's always something that I did in my free time. I was working full-time for several years when it was in its early years, and at the latter stage, I was traveling a bunch. And so I always just squeezed the blog work into my life and scouted the result of it around everything else I had going on. And so given that, aside from hiring a CEO, like, I don't know, maybe I could have asked Jorge, but I didn't know Jorge before. Or asked her, maybe you want to be my CEO. And they're kind of taking that role now. But aside from hiring someone to manage it and grow it, it was never going to be more than a blog and a couple of Facebook groups. I just didn't have the time, motivation, whatever it may be, that I was lacking. But with new partners and different people that they're bringing on with different skill sets and more time and availability and perhaps interest, I think we could make Physician on Fire into more than just a blog. And there's a number of different avenues that we could go down.
Jorge, would you like to weigh in on your vision for Physician on Fire going forward?
Sure. Before I had the hospitals group, which was my first company, I didn't understand the idea of fire. I didn't even know what a blog was. And my mentorship was very fast over those 2 or 3 years that we had the entrepreneurship side. What I realized when I remember all the conversations, the physicians' lounges in all the hospitals, I realized that there needs to be a way of getting doctors to take control of their own story, whatever that journey is. And what I learned through the website is that fire can be reached different ways. There's lean fire, there's FATFIRE, there's coast fire, there's barista fire. There's a lot of information. And it's funny, as doctors, when we consult on a patient and we can't figure something out, we consult neurologists, gastroenterologists. But for ourselves, we don't have a system of standard of care or standard of what to do. Nirav and I really believe that the foundation of this Wikipedia of finance for doctors that Leif has built, we can put it where it's accessible to the doctor, but then we make an action plan or an executionable plan, finance plan. And Nirav and I, we are very interested in data. We've worked with Alertive. We worked on predicting hypertension, predicting machine learning models, that kind of stuff. So we're very into software. And the idea is if we could put chief financial officer in your pocket for the data that we get from the doctors and give them a plan so that they can say, this is my data, these are my finances. What are the potential outputs I can have in terms of fire? And this way they can choose and see, maybe fat is not possible for you because there's such variability in the finances of part of the doctors. So that's kind of where we're at. But we need to learn Physician on Fire and understand what it is, understand the reader, understand the customer, if you want to call it. And that's the process that we're doing right now.
Got it. Yeah. Physician on Fire is very heavy on calculators, and I've used several of them. And the step-by-step guide's very actionable. I've used your backdoor Roth IRA step-by-step multiple times every year. Still go back to it just to make sure I'm doing everything right. And those things can be very, very valuable if put in a palatable app. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, unclear if it's an app. Maybe though. Yeah, maybe that's where this goes, right? Because these spreadsheets, Leif and I were just saying about this yesterday, these spreadsheets are really good, but most of us aren't sitting down these days, at the desktop and using a spreadsheet. Leif is particularly excellent at spreadsheet building and modeling. I don't know where you learned that skill, Leif. At some point I'd love to learn that. But it's rare to have kind of this spreadsheet modeling, and every situation is so different. This is where software could be more useful. And so on one hand, it's less about it being software. It's more about it being real time, potentially putting this idea of a CFO or a COO in a physician's pocket. I think what makes us really unique is we're not consumers in a typical sense, right? So a lot of the budgeting apps that have been out there are really for budgeting your expenses and tracking your bills and helping you kind of get visibility into that. That doesn't need to be built. And then on the other side, what businesses have is complex modeling and forecasting. But physicians are somewhere in between because we own businesses in many cases. We're either part of practices that are very complex in terms of how they cash flow. They have all these revenue lags from reimbursement, insurance, credentialing can go wrong. And you get a bunch of dials. And then on the other side of the equation, perhaps a lot of physicians, especially in the physician on fire leadership, have real estate or significant investments. And then add on to that this complexity that we have with debt payments are coming, then they're going, and then, maybe there's some forgiveness on the horizon. That is so complicated that a single spreadsheet can't help someone think through that and plan and project. And if treasury rates rise and fall, it's very difficult to figure out what should you do with your cash. So I think all this to say is at some point, I hope that we will provide a set of services that bundle physicians together related to all of this experience we've had when we were pitching VCs. We learned that there are a set of top tier VCs. VCs are really good at marketing capital that they raise. And so let's say Sequoia and some of these other flagship institutions, which have contributed to a significant part of the market cap for private investors, it's impossible for you or I to get in. Our money's no good to the Sequoias. Our money's no good to the Bridgewaters of the world or to the KKRs or the Blackstone, depending on what we're talking about. That seems silly to me, right? Because a teacher's pension plan can get in. A friend of mine's on the Stanford endowment team. They can't even get enough money into Sequoia. I think the real aspiration I'd have is that at some point together, physicians could participate in these exceptional parts of the asset class ecosystem that just aren't available. Leif has made investments in space, for example. I've made an investment in SpaceX through a personal connection. And so that should be available. Now, not everyone should do that. Like to Jorge's point, some people shouldn't do that when they're 33 and still in training. But those are the types of things that we want to bring to bear as a community. And if app solves that and helps kind of guide people into that because it's easy to manage, then sure, that'd be great. But that's not having an app just for an app's sake is probably not the goal. Bringing people together.
Bringing people together, showing them the way forward, and maybe some investment classes that we haven't even thought about or talked about yet in the physician community. Not that you need to do it. Index funds, the lazy 3-fund portfolio will get there as well. But it would be very interesting to have that additional knowledge added to our sphere. And I really look forward to that. Before we end here, guys, Jorge, I really wanted to hear about your kidney donation. So I don't want to let you go before I hear about that. Tell me the story about how you donated a kidney.
When I was in medical school, my mom went into renal failure from actually uncontrolled hypertension, which was the impetus for me. When Nirav talked to me about uncontrolled blood pressure, I paid attention. I donated a kidney to my mom. So as a third-year medical student, I walked into a hospital, a healthy man, and had a nephrectomy. Had the usual complications from that. But once I was a patient, I went through pain and all the other things. It drove what I considered how I delivered care. But when I became a doctor and then corporate medicine came in, I just realized I was not very satisfied with how it was. The challenge with being a doctor, you only make an impact one-to-one. You see one patient, you make an impact. I wanted to make an impact to hundreds of, if not thousands. So when Nirav and I were on the side of a hill waiting for a sunset to come, which never came, by the way, it was all foggy. What I realized, something that my dad told me was, hey, you got to be at the right place at the right time. And my dad told me, that's not enough. And I realized that there was something here, despite the fact that I was cynical about it. And when we saw the data, I knew that this was a way to make an impact on people. And then that was background that led me into leaving medicine and just focusing on changing other people's lives in an impactful way. And it doesn't have to be, prescribing medications. It could be through helping them reach their dreams, right? In all these lounges, I heard a lot of dreams. Doctors have big ideas. They have wonderful ideas. It's sad that they don't have the mechanism to make these ideas into realities. And I think that that is one of the challenges and the reason we need to educate on these options of FIRE and how you get to it so that you can make your dreams, reality.
Love that. Making dreams come true. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. I really appreciate all of your time. Leif, I want to hear about your next adventure. Where are you traveling next? Do you have any big plans?
Yeah, I guess I do. I was going to say, well, we don't travel much anymore, but I'm going to a conference in New Orleans where I'll see Nirav and Jorge. Will you be there too, I think?
Yes, yeah. Next year. I'm skipping this year, unfortunately, but FinCon is such a great time.
Conference called FinCon. Yeah. And then I'm taking my parents to Vietnam. My father served a tour of duty over there as a freshly minted dentist 50 some years ago and hasn't been back. But the three of us, my mom, dad, and I, are going to Vietnam for 2.5 weeks coming up in November. My wife is quite jealous, and I'm very grateful for her staying back with the 3 teenagers while I go and play. So that's coming up next month.
Oh my God, that sounds like such an amazing and impactful experience for you and your parents. Thank you again, you guys, for coming on. I'm so excited to see where Physician on Fire goes next. Stay tuned, everyone, and make sure you guys go check out physicianonfire.com. Anywhere else they can find you guys to get in touch with you?
Well, I'll just mention we're in all the socials. We're on Twitter at Physician on Fire, the Facebook groups that we mentioned, FATFIRE as a group, and Physicians on Fire. There's an Instagram, pretty much everything but TikTok, I guess.
All right. Sounds good.
Maybe that's coming next. You never know.
I need to see you break it down on TikTok, Leif.
Yeah, right. I'll see that happen.
Nirav, Jorge, how can our listeners get in touch with you guys?
All the same places. We check everything in LinkedIn, social, etc. You can find us pretty easily.
All right. Well, thank you again. You guys have a great day, safe travels, and many happy adventures.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Now, a final word from our sponsor. At Pearson Rabbits, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Rabbits builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonrabbits.com today and embark on your journey to safeguarding your future.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.